Namaste, hello, and a very warm welcome to UPSC for everyone. My name is Abhinav, and in this video, we are going to discuss selected topics from the Hindu and Indian Express. We'll be discussing the news from 12th September. Now, we'll be discussing the following topics. India China agree on 5-point action plan. So, Mr. Jaishankar met his counterpart on the sidelines of SCO and they came up with a 5-point action plan. We'll see what those 5 points are. IIP shrinks 10.4% as recovery slows. So I'll tell you all about IIP. This will be helpful for your prelims as well as for mains. Fees must for forest use, Mines Ministry told. Here I will be introducing you to the concept of NPV. Now, Supreme Court has ordered that if anyone uses forest for non-forest use, then they have to pay a fine, which is the NPV. So we'll get to know what is NPV. Streets for People challenge launched. So we'll get to know what this challenge is all about. Hackers from Russia, China targeting US vote according to Microsoft. So even in the last US presidential election, there were allegations of Russia meddling in the elections. Now, Microsoft is saying that hackers from Russia, China, and even Iran are targeting US presidential vote, and both sides, the Democrats and the Republicans, are the targets. Bahrain to normalize ties with Israel. So after UAE, Bahrain also normalizes ties with Israel. So probably we'll see in the future Saudi also normalizing its ties with Israel. New grievance redress system unveiled in J&K. It is known as J&K in grams. So we'll see what is it about. Executives of mining giant to step down after sacred sites destroyed in Australia. Now the mining giant is Rio Tinto, and despite protests from the indigenous people, they destroyed some caves, and those caves had engravings, and they proved that there has been a continuous human existence in Australia for at least 45,000 years. So they basically destroyed the heritage of indigenous people. NASA set to pay firms for mining resources on moon. So in April, NASA and America unveiled Artemis Accord. Under that, they plan to commercially mine the moon. So now NASA is trying to get companies to mine resources on the moon, and NASA is backing them up, like guaranteeing their business. Then Climate Smart Cities Assessment Framework 2.0. So this has also been unveiled recently. So I will also tell you about what this framework is all about. And then a game of chess in Himalayas. This editorial basically tells us how the events happening today are eerily similar to what happened prior to 1962 war. So we'll see an interesting read. So let's get started. India China agree on 5-point action plan. So our foreign minister Mr. Jaishankar met his counterpart Wang Yi on the sidelines of the SCO meeting that is happening, and they came up with a 5-point plan for quick disengagement of troops at LAC. Now this is basically a background of what has happened May to September in terms of talks. It is like a brief summary, so you can take a screenshot if you want. Now let's see what those 5 points are. So what are the 5 points? Number 1, following the consensus between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping not to allow differences to become disputes. Now what is the difference? Difference in the perception of LAC. We say that this area belongs to us, and they say that this area belongs to us, and it's a historical mistake because of the area, especially Aksai Chin, which used to be a no man's land. So they were not proper maps. Now China is not ready to leave Aksai Chin because they have built a very strategic road that runs through Aksai Chin, and it joins Xinjiang to Tibet region. So if that region China loses, then it loses control to both Tibet and Xinjiang. So China is adamant about Aksai Chin, and it is forcing us to change the status quo. And China is an expansionist power. It is not just doing that to us. I told you in the previous video as well They're also messing with Japan, Russia, and all the parties in the South China Sea conflict. Now, as per China, the whole world belongs to China. And on what basis does China claim these areas? They say very vague term, historical maps. Now, these historical maps have no credence. Anyways, moving on. So the first point is not to allow differences to become disputes. Second is disengaging quickly to ease tensions. So whenever there is a standoff, you need to disengage quickly. Then abiding by existing India-China border protocols and avoiding escalatory action. Now escalatory action means firing in the air or physical confrontation that have been taking place. So probably to avoid that. Then continuing dialogue between special representatives. India's special representative is our National Security Advisor, Mr. Doval, and China's is Mr. Wong, and use other mechanisms as well. And number 5, working towards new confidence building measures. Again, I'll advise you to watch video on India-China border dispute that is available on our channel. So it tells all the point as to how the LAC came to be, what have been the CBMs between India and China so far, when did India come to recognize LAC, how did it all go, everything is there. So please spend some time and watch that video. So these are the 5 points, but then again the question comes, can we really trust the Chinese? And the answer is no. IIP shrinks to 10.4% as recovery slows. Now these figures are for July 2020. Now IIP is an index of industrial production and it is released on a monthly basis. But the problem is that it comes with a 6-week lag. Okay. So with such a big lag, it is not possible to monitor it in real time. And its importance is that it tells us about the manufacturing sector, how the manufacturing sector is working. And in fact, the 8 core industries form 40% weightage in this index. So this index is very, very important. Let us see what is IIP all about. So like I said, IIP is Index of Industrial Production. It is an index that tracks manufacturing activity in different sectors of an economy. Now what it does, it measures the industrial production for a period, usually a month, against the reference period. For example, we will compare July 2020 to July 2019 or May 2020 or June 2020 to get a picture. Now we are already in September, but like I said, 6-week lag. So that is why the report of July is coming now. Now what does it signify? It is a key economic indicator of the manufacturing sector of the economy. Now there is a lag of 6 weeks in the publication of IIP index data after the reference month ends. So for June, we are getting in September. What is its base year? Base year is 2011-12. Who compiles it? The CSO, which has now been subsumed under NSO. I've been telling you time and again, NSO comprises of 2 erstwhile institutions, CSO and NSSO. Okay. So see, these are the kind of questions that you might get in prelims, multiple type questions, that what is the base year of IIP, who compiles IIP, is it monthly, quarterly, annually, and so on. Now what is its composition? The IIP constitutes are divided into 3 broad sectors, namely mining, manufacturing, and electricity. And the 8 core industries comprise about 40% of weight of items in IIP. So the next question is, what are core industries? And these are very, very important. You must know these 8 core industry. Electricity, crude oil, coal, cement, steel, refinery products, natural gas, and fertilizers. So some are related to energy like electricity, crude oil, coal, and natural gas. Others are related to infrastructure like cement, steel, refinery products, and fertilizers. So to remember what you can do, you can divide these 8 into 4. 4 for energy and 4 for infrastructure. Now energy is electricity, we all use. Oil, crude oil, we all use. Coal and natural gas. And in infrastructure, cement, yes, right? Steel, okay. Fertilizer is also there because it is used in farming and refinery products. So this is how you can divide them and remember them. But you must remember them because you tend to forget them, and these are some basic questions that you must know the answers to. Now the next question is, where is the IIP data sourced from? Now this data is sourced from various agencies in different ministries or departments of government. So this is authentic data that is sourced from government department. The CSO uses secondary data to reach monthly IIP number. So it does not use primary data but secondary data, that is inferred data that it gets from various departments. And that too, the chunk of data comes from Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, DIPP. So again, this is important. Now who uses the IIP data? Of course, government compiles it, so government does use it. So various government agencies such as Ministry of Finance and RBI, and even private firms and analysts use this data for analytical purposes. Now what does the shrinking IIP indicate? Because we saw it fell down by 10.4%. So basically it means that the economic recovery that we saw in May and June is falling down in July. But this can't be a long-term trend because the data from August, September, October, etc. would be a more realistic picture of how economy is doing. No doubt we are under stress, but how bad the situation is, we'll get to know later on. Fees must for forest use, Mines Ministry told. So basically the Ministry of Mines is doing some exploratory digging in some forests. So it asked the Environment Ministry to not to charge the NPV that is usually charged because it is a ministry, but Forest Ministry said that it is not possible because it is the order of Supreme Court, and if we give an exemption to you, then we'll have to give an exemption to everyone, and this will not be a good thing. Now what is NPV? NPV is net present value. Let us explore what really is NPV. First, let me give you a brief. The Ministry of Mines has requested an expert advisory committee of Environment Ministry to exempt it from Supreme Court mandated fees that prospectors pay when they dig exploratory boreholes in forests. But the ministry refused the request because it would be discriminatory and it would be a violation of the order of the Honorable Supreme Court. Now what is NPV? It is net present value. Okay. Now this is a fees. So first, what is the fees based on? The Supreme Court mandates that a payment based on NPV must be paid by those who use forest land for non-forestry purposes. So only those who are engaging in non-forestry purposes have to pay this. Now what is NPV? Like I said, net present value. It is a monetary approximation of the value that is lost when a piece of forest land has been razed. So you cut a forest, that forest has some monetary value, so it's equivalent. Of course, we can't have an exact equivalent, so it's an approximation. So which brings us to the next question, that how is NPV calculated? Now this is calculated on the basis of services and ecological value, and there are prescribed formulae for calculating this amount. This is based on what? Ecological services and the ecological value, and they have formulae for calculating that. Now this valuation basically depends on location of the forest patch and the nature of the forest and the type of industry that is going to be replacing the forest patch. So important things are location, nature of the forest area, and the industrial enterprise that will be replacing the forest area. So based on that, they come up with NPV value, which is net present value. Now, how much has to be paid? So 2 to 5% of NPV of the total forest area in the lease area has to be paid by the company to Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. So this is about NPV. Now this might be a question in your UPSC prelims, or even in mains they could be asking such questions. Now next is Streets for People Challenge launched. Now Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs has launched an initiative for making cities more pedestrian friendly. Now this is a common problem in cities. If you are living in a city, you must have seen that there are practically no walking spaces. The walking spaces have been encroached upon either by illegal parking, or there are street hawkers who are sitting there illegally. Of course, the street hawkers have to make a living, but then there has to be proper area earmarked for their sitting, because we need place to walk, especially with the growing traffic and the instances of accidents. So let us see. So this challenge has been launched by Union Housing and Urban Affairs Ministry to make cities more pedestrian friendly. This is a response to the need for walkable urban spaces during the COVID-19 pandemic, because if you take away or if you encroach upon those walking spaces, then it leads to more crowding, more people are closer to each other. So God forbid if there's a next pandemic or such a condition in future, then we have to prepare. So this is a challenge that looks to the future. Now, along with the recent initiative promoting cycling in cities, the Streets for People Challenge would help cities provide safer means of transport with social distancing. Okay, and now these days cycling is becoming very popular across the world because of the lockdowns, and gyms and recreational spaces are not open, so people are taking up cycling, and cycling has benefits for your health and also for the environment. So a very good initiative. Now, who is organizing this challenge? The Smart Cities Mission of Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. Who can apply for it? Now this challenge is not only limited to smart cities. All the cities with population over 5 lakh and capital cities are eligible to apply for this challenge. And what does the challenge include? It includes the following things: creation of pedestrian friendly streets in areas with high footfall, like crowded markets or the main business centers or the main streets where there is high footfall. There should be pedestrian friendly streets. Revitalizing dead spaces in neighborhoods. There might be some areas where you can walk, but because of broken pavements or some other reason, or because of lack of lighting, you're not going there. So it also aims at revitalizing those dead spaces. Reimagining the spaces under flyovers. That is also very important, because a lot of space goes waste under the flyovers and it becomes home to beggars, homeless people, and to some antisocial elements. Creating walking links through parks and institutional areas. So it would be better the maximum people walk, the good for them and for the city as well. The cities have to submit their proposals by February 11 and implement their interventions by March 31, 2021. So this is a challenge that looks to the future in light of the current pandemic situation. Hackers from Russia, China targeting US vote, according to Microsoft. Microsoft has claimed that there have been cyber attacks from China, Russia and Iran, and it said it thwarted recent cyber attacks targeting both Republican and Democratic presidential campaigns. Now, even in the previous election, there were allegations that Russia had interfered in the US presidential election, and again there are chances of interference in the US presidential election by these countries. Now, Microsoft claims that the attackers have targeted political operatives, think tanks, consultants, and political parties in Europe as well. And there have been changes in the policies of other social media giants as well in the run-up to election. Twitter has said that it would implement a policy next week to remove false or misleading information intended to undermine public confidence in an election, including unverified claims of victory. Especially Twitter is in a spat with President Trump because Twitter even removed his tweets. So again, a question is arising now on the global platform that how powerful these social media giants should be. Should they be above government? Because there can be ideology differences. But it is also a very gray area whether social media should be regulated or not. There are both pros and cons, but taking a side would really be difficult in this case. Now, Google also said that it would take steps to ensure its autocomplete search feature doesn't make such misguided suggestions. Now, just to humor you, the names of the groups that have been involved in these attacks: a Russian group named Strontium, Chinese group Zirconium, and Iran-based group Phosphorus. So they are probably inspired by the periodic table. Bahrain to normalize ties with Israel. So after the Abrahamic Accords that were signed between USA, UAE, and Israel, now there's news that Bahrain would also normalize its ties with Israel. Now Bahrain is a small island state which is a close ally of Saudi Arabia, and it is also the site of US Navy's regional headquarters. So UAE has joined hands with Israel. Now Bahrain also. So probably in future we'll also see Saudi Arabia also normalizing ties with Israel, and all these things have put the future of Palestine in jeopardy. See, geopolitics is not run on emotions but on pragmatic considerations. New grievance redress system unveiled in J&K. Now, before J&K was reconfigured into union territory, when it was a state, there were rampant reports of corruption in the state. And one of the ways to check corruption is to have a grievance redress system. Now, what is a grievance redress system? For example, so you go to a government office and you demand a service, because at the end of the day, the government's job is to provide service. Now, they are mandated to do that. You give your application and then you have a tracking system. Now, what used to happen earlier, that for the things that people were supposed to do, you would have to pay them to do their job. And why? Because the officials had so much of discretion. Now, to check that, they have introduced a grievance redress system, that if someone is not doing his job or is not providing you the service that he is supposed to, then you can complain, and you can also track what is the status of your application. So let's see. It's called Jammu and Kashmir Integrated Grievance Redress and Monitoring System, JK in grams. It is a bid to create an interface with the public and focus on governance issues in the union territory. The system is being launched on a pilot basis in 3 districts: Jammu, Srinagar, and Riaz. It will gradually be rolled out in the remaining districts by October 2. The ingrams will make the existing mechanisms more robust and efficient. That is what the whole point is. It will give minute by minute status update of grievances on the portal. So it will tell you that your application has been forwarded or it is being processed right now and it is at which level. You'll get each and every kind of information. Now, action will follow if any delay or carelessness is found while addressing people's grievances. District collectors and deputy commissioners will be primary nodes for receiving, disposing, and monitoring grievances. So, role is district collector and deputy commissioners. Feedback by complaint and grievance submission through call center is also available. So, there would be a number on which you can call on all days except Sunday. So, this is J&K Grievance Redressal System, or J&K in grams. Executives of mining giant to step down after sacred sites destroyed in Australia. So I've already told you the company is Rio Tinto. So this came to light in May, that despite objections by the indigenous groups called the Putu Kunti Kurama and Pinukura people, they had objected and yet they destroyed the caves. So there was a shareholder revolt over the company's willful destruction of prehistoric rock shelters sacred to 2 Australian indigenous groups, which I've already told you. So it was revealed in May that the mining giant had destroyed the indigenous sites dating to 46,000 years ago in the Pilbara Desert in Western Australia, despite objections by traditional land owners. The cave shelters indicated the presence of continuous human habitation for more than 45,000 years. So see the human greed. Because of their greed, they have destroyed the heritage and culture of these indigenous people. And this is especially a very bad time because throughout the world, there are debates and discussions about the problems of racism, and this is what they're doing in Australia. The shelters were blown up at a time of global upheaval around race and inequality, bringing to the fore long held frustrations that heritage is often subjugated to Australia's mining industry. Australia is very rich in mineral resources, so they have a very huge mining industry, but there has to be a balance between greed and heritage. And just because they are indigenous people, their grievances and objections are being blatantly neglected. NASA to pay firms for mining resources on moon. So NASA launched an effort to pay companies to mine resources on the moon. So the mining on the moon is said to be the next $1 trillion industry, and it is also going to be a war front in future because China also is planning to send its manned missions to moon, and there is a race now to own the moon. Right now nobody owns the moon, and the whole outer space thing is governed by the UN mandated Outer Space Treaty 1968. So it says that the objects in outer space belong to all humanity. But in April, Mr. Trump, he tried to change all of that when he unveiled the Artemis Accords. Now these accords pave way for NASA to their trip to moon. What they plan to do is, now suppose this is Earth, this is moon, and this is Mars. So they'll go to first moon, they'll set up a base here, and from this base they will launch mission to Mars. So this also involves habitation, and the timeline is about 2024. Now Artemis Accords also say that companies would be mining on the moon, and they would be dividing areas on moon as their territory. Right now moon belongs to no one, but if these accords are signed by large number of countries, then it will lead to the colonization of moon. So moon is going to be the next frontier where there will be struggle. So NASA announced that it would buy from the companies rocks, dirt, and other lunar material that they get from there. Why? Because NASA seeks to spur private extraction of coveted off-world resources for its use. Now I have uploaded a video on the whole Artemis Accords. It is a very enlightening video. So I would suggest you that you go and watch that video. You'll get to know what kind of resources are there on the moon to be extracted. What is the whole legality about outer space? Who owns the moon or who can own the moon? It covers everything. Okay. Now NASA said that it views the mined resources as the property of the company, that is property of NASA, and in effect the property of United States government. And the materials would become the sole property of NASA after purchase. So right now moon is part of global commons, but now NASA is saying that you go mine material, we'll buy it, and it will be an exclusive NASA product. NASA's Artemis program envisions a return of American astronauts to the moon by 2024. NASA has cast such a mission as a precursor to a future first human voyage to Mars. I've already told you they plan to build a base on moon to launch their missions to Mars. NASA in May set the stage for global debate over the basic principles governing how people will live and work on the moon, releasing the main tenets of what it hopes will become an international pact for moon exploration called the Artemis Accords. So please do watch the video on Artemis Accords. Climate Smart Cities Assessment Framework 2.0. Now, this is an initiative which deals with urban planning and development in India. And the aim is to inculcate a climate sensitive approach to planning and development in India. Now, this is being implemented by Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs in conjunction with the Climate Center for Cities under the National Institute of Urban Affairs. Now, what are the objectives? The objective is to create a clear roadmap for cities towards combating climate change while planning and implementing their actions, including investments. So this is very important because there's a phenomena called urban heat island. So what happens that in cities, especially in crowded areas, you will see that temperature is 1 to 2 degree or even higher than the surrounding areas. Now there are specific conditions in cities that lead to such a condition, like use of ACs. Now metals and concrete, they absorb heat, right? And then there is also the roads, metallized roads, they also absorb so much heat. Then in a blind trend to copy European architecture, the fools in our country, what they do, they use glass architecture. Now when they use glass architecture, no matter how good a glass is, how expensive climate proofing you use, your air condition needs go up, and that also leads to higher concentration of warm air in the city. Now all these things, they keep absorbing heat throughout the day, and in the night they release that heat. So the night temperatures also are higher, and that's a vicious cycle. Higher the temperature, more AC you will need, more AC you will use. The more AC you use, the more exhaust warm air there will be, and then again the whole cycle goes on. So there's a very important and pertinent need that we inculcate climate sensitive approach to urban planning and development in India. And this Climate Smart Cities Assessment Framework aims to do just that. So I've already told you who is implementing it. Climate Center for Cities under National Institute of Urban Affairs in support with Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. Now the framework has 28 indicators which are divided across 5 categories. So you should know the 5 broad categories: energy and green buildings, urban planning, green cover and biodiversity, mobility and air quality, waste management and water management. So these are very basic things. You don't even have to try that hard to remember. You see buildings all around you, and I've told you how buildings using glass architecture are energy guzzlers. So number 1, we should have green buildings, and for that we also have a green building code in India that tells us how eco-friendly the building is. So greener the building, lower the energy cost, right? So that is number 1 condition. How else can we save energy? For example, natural lighting could be there in the building that will save energy. Number 2, there is waste in the city, so waste management. There is water problem in almost every city, so water management. You also need mobility, and associated with mobility is pollution, so mobility and air quality. And the last one is urban planning, green cover and biodiversity. That means you need green spaces within cities which would act like lungs or mini lungs for that particular city. So these are the 5 broad categories. You don't have to try that hard to remember. You see buildings everywhere, so green building and energy. You need mobility, so yes, mobility, and with mobility comes air quality. You see waste, so waste management. You see water, water management, and also you need mini lungs for the city, that is provided by urban planning, green cover and biodiversity. Now you can take a screenshot. These are the 5 broad areas, and in 5 broad areas, other categories, total 28 things come under this plan, which is called the City Assessment Framework 2.0. A game of chess in the Himalayas. Now this editorial by Mr. Stanley Johnny tells us how the events that are unfolding today are eerily similar to what happened prior to the 1962 war. So let's see what he has to say. He says the parallels are hard to ignore. In August 1959, after the first border clash between India and Chinese troops in Longju in eastern sector, China said Indian troops had crossed the McMahon line. As they are saying today that Indian troops crossed the LAC and they opened fire. They said the same thing in 1959 and opened fire, and the Chinese border guards had fired back. The next day, New Delhi protested against the Chinese statement, saying that it was Chinese troops that had moved into Indian territory and opened fire. Same happened recently as well. 61 years later, the statement issued by India and China after the border clashes are eerily similar. Both sides accuse each other of transgressing across the LAC. Both sides accuse each other of opening fire. Both sides blame each other for the current standoff. So see the similarity. Now the trigger. What led to the war in 1962? He also finds similarities there as well. Now when the Longju incident happened, not many in India might have thought that the border tensions would lead to a full-scale Chinese invasion. Prime Minister Nehru and his Defense Minister, Mr. V.K. Krishna Menon, were absolutely certain that China would not attack India. So they were highly idealists, so they never thought that China would attack India. And after the war, it was disastrous for both Mr. Menon and for Mr. Nehru. Mr. Menon had to resign and Mr. Nehru had to live with the burden of losing the war. Now Nehru had betted big on India's friendship with China. He was idealist. He saw both countries as victims of imperialism and natural leaders of Asia. The realist in Nehru believed that peace on India's northern borders was an imperative for the newly born republic's rise and material development. So in a way he was right as well, because we needed to have our resources towards national development and not towards war. So see, history is like a mixed bag. You may or may not support someone, but in the hindsight, it is always very, very easy to dismiss anyone or to criticize anyone, but people take decisions as per their own ideological inclinations and the advice that they get and the information that is available to them. So in 1950s, Nehru continued to defend China in international fora. So this was a very foolish thing to do. India accepted the Chinese sovereignty over Tibet and signed an agreement with Peking over the trade with Tibet. Now we should have never done that. But what Nehru hoped in return for India's friendship was that China respect its boundaries, like the McMahon line in the east frontier based on the 1842 Tibet-Kashmir agreement in the west. But Nehru was wrong. The first setback, the Longju incident, and within 2 months, another incident took place when an Indian police patrol team in Kongla Pass in Ladakh came under attack. Now this was a wake-up call for Nehru. He asked China to withdraw its troops from Longju in return for assurance from India not to reoccupy the area, and proposed that both sides pull back from the disputed Aksai Chin, where China had already unilaterally built a strategic highway. That happened in 1957. And I told you earlier that, see, this is a rough diagram. So here is Tibet and here is Xinjiang. So a strategic highway runs through Aksai Chin, which connects Tibet and Xinjiang. Now both regions are strategically very important for China. We'll make a video in future and we'll tell you the importance of Tibet. Tibet is very important geopolitically and also because it is the mother of many rivers. In fact, it is called the source of water for Asia. We'll see how many rivers originate from Tibet and their importance. Now coming back to the article, but China rejected this proposal and it made a counter offer to recognize the McMahon line in the east in return for India's recognition of Chinese sovereignty over Aksai Chin. And thankfully, here Mr. Nehru did not make a mistake and he did not agree to Chinese demand, because Aksai Chin is very, very important for us as well. Nehru, having checked the historical maps, documents including revenue records and land surveys, which he got from India office in London, rejected the Chinese offer because he thought it would mean India abandoning its legitimate claims over Aksai Chin. And after the collapse of Nehru, Zhao and Lai talks in 1960, in Delhi, tensions escalated fast. China intensified patrolling along the border. In November 1961, Nehru ordered his forward policy. So this policy was called forward policy, as part of which India set up patrol posts along the LAC, which was seen as a provocation in Beijing. So even today, Beijing is rattled because India has built up its infrastructure along the LAC, and we have every right to build infrastructure on our side of the LAC. Now he draws the parallels. The situation today is exactly the same as 1962. Back then, Tibet factor was looming over India-China ties. As soon as the Dalai Lama took refuge in India, Chinese leaders, including Deng Xiaoping, had threatened to settle accounts with the Indians when time comes. China also feared that India was providing help to Tibetan rebels after the 1959 rebellion, and this is also connected to the SFF battalion that we have in India. Today, both sides have managed to sidestep the Tibetan question in their bilateral engagement. And unlike in 1962, when India was not politically and militarily prepared for a war with China, today's conflict is between two nuclear powers. But the problem is this: while the overall conflict is different, the border conflict looks similar to what it was in the late 1950s and early 1960s. The boundary has still not been delimited and demarcated, and China is very much averse to marking a final boundary. China has not recognized the McMahon line, and India has not accepted China's control over Aksai Chin, and we will not accept that. Despite the volatile situation, an uneasy truce prevailed on the border at least since 1975, when both sides have made improvements in ties since Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi visited Beijing in 1988. And 1975 was the last time that shots were fired between India and China. But the truce has now been disrupted, with China first moving to block Indian patrolling in finger area of Pangong Tso between fingers 4 to 8. We say that finger 8 is co-terminus with LAC, but China now says that it is only up to finger 4, and tomorrow they will say that entire India is Chinese territory. So we have to stand up to a bully and we have to give him a fitting reply. I've also explained what are finger areas in previous videos. You can go and check them out. Or you can also go to our Instagram page, UPSC for everyone. There also I have posted about finger area of Pangong Tso. Now getting back to it. So China is blocking Indian patrolling in the finger area of Pangong Tso and the Galwan Valley in eastern Ladakh during summer. Now China thinks that they can dominate the area in winters. Again, that is not the case, because Indian Army is one of the most competent and one of the most experienced army when it comes to fighting in winters at high altitudes. So it is in favor of China only to disengage. Now this situation is similar to Nehru's forward policy in 1961, taking over the heights of Kailash range. Now similarly, what happened in 1961, that Chinese occupied some heights on the northern banks and we occupied heights on the southern banks, and the similar thing has happened. When Nehru ordered the forward policy, his aim was to secure the vast border and prevent further incursions. He never thought China would attack. Now, despite the experience of 1962, India appears to be taking calculated risks by making forward movements, and we should be making forward movements. Strategic dominance. In the run-up to 1962 war, Mao Zedong had taken a unity and struggle policy towards India. So Indian policy was, Nehru unveiled the policy, forward policy in 1961. See, this is also helpful for your history, paper 1. So this is important for your paper 1, paper 2 and paper 3. Now coming back to it. So this meant laying emphasis on unity with India on mutually agreeable matters while continuing the struggle over border issues. So it was simple that where we can converge, we'll keep converging, and where we have differences, we'll keep working on those differences. Nehru failed to understand the gravity of this approach. He first saw only unity, and after the Longzhou and Kongla clashes, he saw only struggle. China, on the other hand, consistently played what game theorists call the game of strategic dominance. The strategy which would yield positive outcomes irrespective of the strategies of the rival player. So Chinese are smart, so they played the game of strategic dominance that no matter what the opponent does, they will have a net gain. Now back then, China saw itself as the most powerful force in Asia because Japan had been decimated after the Second World War, and today China sees itself as the major world power. The British withdrawal and the partition of subcontinent had changed the geopolitical balance in the continent. Mao was facing challenges to his leadership within the party after the disastrous Great Leap Forward. And similarly, Mr. Xi Jinping is also facing challenges in his own country because of his failure to respond to the corona pandemic and also the floods that have happened in China. He's becoming an absolutist dictator. He's also removing his opponents by what he calls the Great Purge. Anybody who opposes Mao is removed on the charges of corruption. So again, similarity there. Globally, there were cracks in Sino-Soviet alliance, especially after the Soviet intervention in Hungary. When it set the ball for border tensions rolling, it knew that ultimate risk would be a limited war, and it was ready to take that risk because even in the event of a war, China calculated that it could retain its strategic dominance. So they had figured it out back then, but now they really can't afford to mess with India on a full-scale level. Understanding China's moves, now this is his opinion. The Chinese strategy today is not very different from that of 1960s. Now China considers that it has arrived on the global stage as a military power and economic superpower. But the COVID-19 outbreak has battered its economy, but it is recovering fast. India, on the other side, is in prisoner's dilemma on how to tackle China. India is big, rising power, but is going through short-term challenges. Its economy is weak. Its geopolitical standing in the neighborhood is not in its best days. It is also true. So let us see what happens, and let's hope that we resolve this issue. Let's hope that we don't lose any of our brave soldiers who are fighting there and who are deployed there to protect our motherland. So folks, that is all for this video. I hope this was helpful. Please join with us on our Instagram channel, UPSC for Everyone. Also, please do subscribe to our channel and push the bell icon so that you get notifications whenever we post new videos. So see you next time. Till then, stay happy, stay safe, and have a great day. Namaste, Jai Hind.